I was 12 when my parents sat us down for what they called the family meeting. Little did I know they were about to divide us up like furniture. My brother Michael was the golden child, straight A's, star athlete, Dad's mini-me. My sister Sarah was Mom's princess, beautiful, charming, everything I wasn't. And then there was me, the leftover. When they announced their divorce, I thought we'd all stay together. I was wrong, dead wrong. Dad took Michael, Mom took Sarah. And I got a social worker and a garbage bag for my clothes. 15 years later, they all came crawling back. But I wasn't that abandoned little girl anymore. That morning started like any other Sunday in our picture-perfect suburban home. The smell of Mom's famous blueberry pancakes drifted through the hallway, and I could hear Michael bouncing his basketball against the garage door while Sarah practiced her violin scales in the living room. Dad was reading his newspaper at the kitchen table, occasionally grunting approval at whatever sports scores he was reviewing. From the outside, we looked like the American dream. 2-story colonial house, white picket fence, 3 kids, and 2 successful parents. But if you looked closer, you'd notice the subtle cracks. Dad's coffee mug sat alone at one end of the massive dining table. Mom's plate remained untouched, her food growing cold as she fussed over Sarah's hair. When Michael burst through the kitchen door, grass stains on his knees and sweat beading his forehead, Dad's face lit up like Christmas morning. "There's my champion! How's that free throw percentage looking, son?" When Sarah glided in wearing her pristine white dress, Mom practically glowed. "Oh, sweetheart, you look absolutely angelic! Did you practice your recital piece?" And then there was me. I slipped into my seat between them, the middle child in every sense of the word. "Morning, Mom. Morning, Dad." They both nodded absently, already turning their attention back to their chosen favorites. I stabbed at my pancakes, watching the syrup pool around the edges, wondering why I always felt like a guest in my own home. The tension between my parents had been building for months, maybe years. They spoke to each other in clipped, professional tones, like business partners discussing quarterly reports rather than spouses planning a life together. When they thought we weren't listening, I'd catch fragments of heated whispers about irreconcilable differences and what's best for the children. The weird part was how they started treating us like chess pieces in their private war. Dad would pull Michael aside for man-to-man talks that always ended with conspiratorial glances toward Mom. She'd have her special girl time with Sarah, complete with shopping trips and spa days that I was mysteriously never invited to join. I became their message system. "Tell your father dinner's ready," or "Ask your mother if she's picked up my dry cleaning." The more they pulled Michael and Sarah into their respective corners, the more I felt myself disappearing. It wasn't that they were openly cruel to me. They weren't. But their love felt rationed, carefully measured and always conditional on my usefulness as a go-between. When I tried to make peace during their arguments, they'd pat my head and say, "Rebecca, honey, you're too young to understand." When I excelled at school or tried to share my achievements, their responses felt hollow, distracted. "That's nice, sweetheart. Did you remember to give Dad that message about the car payment?" I started keeping track of things in a little notebook, not consciously at first, just scribbling down moments that felt important. Monday, Dad took Michael to batting practice. Didn't ask if I wanted to come. Wednesday, Mom and Sarah went dress shopping for the spring concert. Said I wouldn't be interested. Friday, family movie night. Got outvoted 4-1 on the film choice. Again. The patterns became impossible to ignore. Michael got Dad's attention through sports and achievement. Sarah captured Mom's heart with her artistic talents and social graces. But what was my thing? What made me special enough to choose? I tried everything. I joined the soccer team, hoping to bond with Dad through athletics. He came to exactly one game, spent the entire time on his phone dealing with work calls, and left during halftime. I signed up for art classes, thinking maybe Mom would see something of herself in my creative attempts. She glanced at my drawings for all of 30 seconds before redirecting the conversation to Sarah's upcoming violin competition. The morning of the family meeting, I woke up with a strange knot in my stomach. Something felt different. Mom was already dressed in her best business suit at 8 a.m. on a Sunday. Dad had traded his usual weekend golf attire for slacks and a button-down shirt. Even Michael and Sarah seemed unusually quiet, like they knew something I didn't. "Rebecca, honey, can you come to the living room, please?" Mom's voice had that fake, cheerful quality she used when delivering bad news. I found them all arranged like some sort of corporate presentation. Mom and Dad on opposite ends of the couch, Michael and Sarah in the wingback chairs, leaving me to perch on the ottoman in the middle. Dad cleared his throat the same way he did before important business calls. "Kids, your mother and I have something important to discuss with you." My stomach dropped. "We've decided that our marriage isn't working anymore, and we're going to get divorced." The words hit the room like a grenade. Sarah started crying immediately, those perfect tears that somehow made her look even more beautiful. Michael's face went stone cold, his jaw clenched the way Dad's did when he was angry. I just sat there, feeling like I was watching this happen to someone else's family. "Now, we want you to know that we love you all very much," Mom continued, reaching for Sarah's hand. "And we're going to make sure this transition is as smooth as possible for everyone." That's when Dad dropped the real bomb. "We've given this a lot of thought, and we believe it would be best if Michael comes to live with me, and Sarah stays with Mom." The room spun. My ears started ringing. "What about Rebecca?" Sarah asked, her voice small and confused. My parents exchanged a look, one of those loaded glances that said more than words ever could. Mom spoke first, her voice gentle but distant. "Well, sweetheart, we think Rebecca would benefit from a more stable environment during this difficult time." "What does that mean?" I managed to croak out. "There's a wonderful residential program," Dad explained, pulling out a brochure like he was selling vacation packages. "It's specifically designed for children from families going through major transitions. You'll have counselors, educational support, activities." "You're sending me away." The words came out flat, emotionless. I was in shock. "We're giving you the best possible care," Mom corrected quickly. "Michael needs the structure that your father can provide, and Sarah thrives on the emotional support I can offer. You need something different, Rebecca, something we can't give you right now." The lies they told themselves were almost impressive in their creativity. Michael needed structure? He was the most self-disciplined kid I knew. Sarah needed emotional support? She was surrounded by friends and admirers everywhere she went. What I needed was my family, but apparently that wasn't on the table. "How long?" I whispered. "Just until we get everything sorted out," Dad said, which sounded like corporate speak for indefinitely. The rest of that conversation blurred together. There was talk about visitation schedules and phone calls, about how this was temporary and how much they'd miss me. Michael sat silent through the entire thing, probably calculating how this affected his baseball season. Sarah cried and asked if she could visit me, which made Mom tear up and pull her closer. I felt like I was disappearing in real time, becoming invisible even as they discussed my future. They talked about me like I was a problem to be solved rather than their daughter. The daughter who mediated their fights, who tried desperately to hold the family together, who loved them despite their obvious preferences for her siblings. That afternoon, while Mom helped Sarah pack a bag for her first week at our new home, and Dad showed Michael his new bedroom setup, I sat alone in my room with a garbage bag. Not even a proper suitcase, just a black plastic bag that smelled like the kitchen trash. I looked around at my bedroom, at the walls covered with family photos where I always seemed to be slightly out of frame or positioned awkwardly behind my siblings, at the bookshelf full of stories about families who stayed together through anything, at the little desk where I'd done homework every night, hoping that good grades might earn me the attention my siblings got so effortlessly. 24 hours later, I was riding in the back of a social worker's car, watching my childhood disappear through the rear window. Mom had hugged me goodbye, but it felt like the kind of embrace you give to acquaintances. Dad shook my hand. Actually shook my hand, like I was his business partner instead of his 12-year-old daughter. Michael had mumbled something about staying in touch, but his eyes were already focused on the basketball hoop Dad was planning to install in their new driveway. Sarah promised to write letters, though we both knew she'd be too busy with her new life to remember her displaced sister. The last thing I saw was our house growing smaller in the distance, and I realized that they weren't just divorcing each other. They were divorcing me too. I just didn't get a say in the custody arrangement. The Riverside Children's Home wasn't the horror story you might imagine. The building was clean, the staff was kind, and the other kids were dealing with their own family catastrophes. But every night, lying in a narrow bed in a room I shared with 3 other girls, I wondered what I had done wrong. What flaw in my character made me the child they could live without? Weeks turned into months. The promised phone calls became sporadic, then rare, then non-existent. Visitation weekends were canceled due to scheduling conflicts or travel plans or Sarah's recitals that I couldn't attend anyway. Michael's Little League games became more important than seeing his sister. Mom's new apartment wasn't set up for guests. Dad's work schedule was absolutely brutal right now. The excuses were endless and creative, but the message was clear. Out of sight, out of mind. I started having panic attacks around month 3, the kind where your chest feels like it's caving in and you can't breathe and you're sure you're going to die right there on the cafeteria floor. The counselors were patient and kind, explaining that my symptoms were normal for children experiencing family rejection. They used clinical terms like abandonment trauma and attachment disruption, which somehow made it worse. There was a name for what had happened to me, which meant it happened to other kids too. The worst part wasn't the loneliness, though that was crushing. It wasn't even the rejection, though that carved out something hollow in my chest that never quite healed. The worst part was doubting my own reality. Had I imagined the family I thought we were? Was I really as difficult and problematic as their actions suggested? Maybe I was defective in some fundamental way that made me unlovable. I started seeing Dr. Martinez, a therapist who specialized in family trauma. She was the first adult who looked me in the eye and said, "Rebecca, what happened to you wasn't your fault." She explained that sometimes parents make choices based on their own limitations rather than their children's needs. That love shouldn't be conditional on being the easiest child to manage, but understanding it intellectually and accepting it emotionally were 2 different things. At 13, I tried to swallow a bottle of aspirin because I figured if I was going to be erased from my family anyway, I might as well finish the job. The attempt failed. I threw up before the pills could do any real damage. But it scared me enough to start taking Dr. Martinez's words seriously. "Your worth isn't determined by your parents' choices," she told me during one of our sessions. "You are inherently valuable, Rebecca. You always have been." Slowly, painfully, I began to build a life without them. I threw myself into school partly because academic achievement was the only thing that had ever earned me positive attention, but mostly because it gave me something to control. My grades skyrocketed. I joined debate team, student council, volunteer clubs, anything that kept me busy and gave me a sense of purpose. The other kids at Riverside became my family in ways I hadn't expected. We were all damaged goods, all rejected or abandoned or removed from homes that couldn't keep us safe. But we understood each other in ways that whole, intact families never could. We celebrated each other's victories and held each other through nightmares. We created our own traditions and inside jokes and fierce loyalties. By the time I turned 16, something had fundamentally shifted inside me. The desperate, needy child who would have done anything for her parents' approval was gone. In her place was someone harder, more self-reliant, and infinitely more careful about where she placed her trust. I stopped waiting for their calls. I stopped hoping for birthday cards or Christmas presents. I stopped checking the mail for letters that never came. I built walls around my heart that were 10 feet thick and topped with razor wire, because I had learned the hard way that the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are often the ones most capable of destroying you. When I graduated high school as valedictorian with a full scholarship to college, I sent them an invitation to the ceremony, not because I expected them to come, but because I wanted them to know what they had missed, what they had thrown away when they decided I was expendable. None of them showed up. I walked across that stage alone, accepted my diploma alone, and celebrated with my chosen family from Riverside who cheered like I had just won the lottery. And that's when I truly understood. I wasn't the leftover. I wasn't the problem. I wasn't broken or defective or inherently unlovable. I was just unfortunate enough to be born into a family that couldn't see my worth. But that was their loss, not mine. The turning point came during my sophomore year of college. sitting in Dr. Chen's Psychology 201 lecture about family systems and attachment theory. She was explaining something called scapegoating, when families designate one member to carry all the dysfunction while the rest maintain their illusion of normalcy. As she described the pattern, I felt like someone had just handed me the missing piece of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve for 8 years. The scapegoated child, Dr. Chen continued, often becomes the family's emotional dumping ground. They're blamed for problems they didn't create, excluded from family units they desperately want to belong to, and ultimately rejected when their presence becomes inconvenient to the family's preferred narrative. My hand shot up before I could stop myself. What happens to those children when they grow up? Dr. Chen's expression softened. Well, that depends. Some remain trapped in the cycle, constantly trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given. Others break free and create healthier relationships. The key is recognizing that the problem was never them. It was the system. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. researching everything I could find about family scapegoating, emotional abandonment, and childhood psychological trauma. For the first time in my life, I had language for what had happened to me, technical terms that validated my experience and proved I wasn't crazy or oversensitive or any of the other things I'd convinced myself I must be. My parents hadn't chosen Michael and Sarah because they were inherently more lovable. They'd chosen them because those relationships were easier, more flattering to their egos, and less threatening to their carefully constructed self-images. I was the inconvenient truth, the reminder that their marriage was failing, their family was dysfunctional, and their parenting was causing damage. So they erased me. The rage that followed this realization was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It started as a slow burn in my chest and gradually consumed everything: my sleep, my appetite, my ability to concentrate on anything else. I was furious at them for abandoning me, furious at myself for believing I deserved it, and furious at the world for letting it happen. I called Dr. Martinez, my old therapist from Riverside, sobbing into the phone at midnight. I finally understand what they did to me, and I don't know what to do with this anger. Anger is appropriate, Rebecca, she said calmly. You should be angry. What happened to you was wrong, and recognizing that is part of healing. The question is, what are you going to do with that anger? I spent the next 3 months in intensive therapy, working through 8 years of suppressed rage and grief. I wrote letters I never sent, screamed into pillows, and punched the heavy bag at the campus gym until my knuckles bled. Slowly, the white-hot fury transformed into something more sustainable, a fierce determination to build a life so full and meaningful that their rejection would become irrelevant. I changed my major to social work, specializing in family therapy and child advocacy. If my own family had taught me anything, it was how devastating parental abandonment could be, and how much difference the right support system could make. I threw myself into internships at children's homes, family service centers, and crisis intervention programs. My professors noticed my passion and dedication. Dr. Harrison, who ran the university's family counseling clinic, offered me a research position studying long-term outcomes for children who'd experienced family estrangement. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was literally making a career out of understanding my own trauma. Meanwhile, I was building the support network I'd never had as a child. My study group became my chosen family. Maria from El Salvador, whose parents had sent her away for being gay. James, who'd been raised by his grandmother after his mother's overdose. And Priya, whose family had disowned her for refusing an arranged marriage. We understood each other's pain in ways that whole, intact families never could. I also started dating, tentatively at first, then with more confidence as therapy helped me recognize my worth. Marcus was a psychology major from Detroit, raised by a single mother who'd worked 3 jobs to put him through school. He was patient with my trust issues, gentle with my trauma responses, and absolutely baffled by my family's behavior. "I don't understand," he said one evening as we walked across campus. "You're incredible, Rebecca. You're smart, compassionate, driven, funny. How could anyone not see that? How could your own parents just walk away?" His confusion was validating in a way I hadn't expected. To someone from a functional family, my parents' behavior was incomprehensible. That meant the problem really wasn't me. By my senior year, I'd built a life I was genuinely proud of. I was graduating summa cum laude with a double major in social work and psychology. I'd been accepted to graduate school with a full assistantship. I had a boyfriend who adored me, friends who supported me, and professors who saw my potential. Most importantly, I'd developed an unshakable sense of my own worth that had nothing to do with external validation. That's when they started trying to come back. It began with a Facebook message from Sarah. I'd deliberately avoided social media for years, but my friends convinced me to create a profile during senior year. Sarah found me within a week. "OMG, Rebecca! I can't believe I found you! You look amazing! I've missed you so much. Can we talk?" I stared at that message for 3 days before responding. Part of me, the 12-year-old who'd been desperate for her sister's love, wanted to respond immediately, but the woman I'd become was more cautious. "Sarah, it's been 8 years. What do you want?" Her response came within minutes, a wall of text about how sorry she was, how she'd thought about me constantly, how she'd tried to convince Mom to bring me home, but was just a kid and didn't have any power. She was getting married in 6 months and desperately wanted me there. "You're my sister, Rebecca. I need you there." The audacity was breathtaking. 8 years of silence, and now she needed me for her picture-perfect wedding photos. I took a screenshot of the conversation and showed it to Dr. Martinez during our monthly check-in sessions. "What do you think she wants?" "I think she's rewriting history," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "It's easier to believe she was a powerless child than to acknowledge that she participated in your exclusion. Now she's planning a major life event and realizes the family narrative has a Rebecca-shaped hole in it. So what do I do? What do you want to do?" That was the million-dollar question. The old Rebecca would have been grateful for any crumb of attention. The new Rebecca had learned to value herself too much to accept breadcrumbs. I wrote back, "Sarah, I appreciate you reaching out, but 8 years is a long time and a lot has changed. I'm not sure a wedding is the right place for us to reconnect after all this time." Her response was immediate and devastating. "I knew you'd be difficult about this. Mom said you always held grudges." And there it was, the same dynamic that had driven me away in the first place. Any boundary I set was reframed as me being difficult. Any request for basic respect was labeled as holding grudges. Nothing had changed except my willingness to accept that treatment. I blocked her on social media and changed my privacy settings. 3 weeks later, Michael called. I hadn't heard his voice since I was 12, and it took me a moment to recognize it. He was deeper now, more confident, every inch the successful young man Dad had groomed him to become. "Rebecca, Jesus, you're hard to track down. Listen, we need to talk." No hello, no how are you, no acknowledgement of 8 years of absence. Just immediate demands, exactly like Dad. "Do we?" I asked calmly. Sarah told me about the wedding thing. "Look, I get that you're pissed, okay? But this family drama needs to stop. We're adults now. We should be able to move past this." "Family drama?" I repeated. "Michael, you do realize I spent 6 years in state care because our parents literally gave me away, right?" "Don't be so dramatic. It was a residential program, not some Oliver Twist situation. And it was temporary." "Temporary? I'm 21 years old. When exactly was this temporary arrangement supposed to end?" The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, "Look, maybe Mom and Dad didn't handle things perfectly, but you can't blame us for that. We were kids too. I'm not blaming you for their choices, Michael. I'm pointing out that none of you, not Sarah, not them, made any effort to maintain a relationship with me after I was removed from the home. 8 years, Michael. 8 years of silence. We thought you needed space to adjust." The lies they told themselves were truly impressive. 8 years of space? Okay, fine. Maybe we should have reached out sooner, but I'm reaching out now, aren't I? Dad's having some health issues, and it's made us all realize how short life is. He wants to see you. My blood pressure spiked. Dad wants to see me? How convenient. What kind of health issues? Heart problems. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but it's made him reflective. He talks about you sometimes, wonders how you're doing. He's had 8 years to wonder. He could have picked up a phone. Rebecca, for Christ's sake, can you just... Look, we're family. That has to count for something. Does it? Because for the last 8 years, your actions have suggested otherwise. I could hear him getting frustrated, the same way he used to when he couldn't manipulate a situation to his advantage. What do you want from us? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry we didn't handle things better. Happy now? An apology isn't a magic reset button, Michael, and yours doesn't sound particularly sincere. What more do you want? I want you to acknowledge what actually happened. I want you to take responsibility for your part in it. And I want you to understand that family isn't just a word you get to use when it's convenient for you. So you're just going to cut us off forever? Over something that happened when we were kids? I'm not cutting you off, Michael. You cut me off 8 years ago. I'm just no longer pretending that didn't happen. He hung up without saying goodbye. The next call came from Mom 2 days later. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Rebecca, honey. Her voice was exactly the same, that artificially bright tone she used when she wanted something. I can't believe how grown up you sound. Hello, Mom. I know this call is long overdue, sweetheart, and I'm so sorry about that. Things have been so complicated, and I kept thinking the right moment would come to reach out, and then more time would pass, and it just became this horrible cycle. Mom, I cut her off gently. Why are you calling now? Because I miss you. She sounded genuinely hurt that I would question her motives. You're my daughter, Rebecca. I've thought about you every single day for 8 years. Have you? Because in 8 years, you've never called, never written, never visited. You've never asked how I was doing or whether I needed anything. So forgive me if I'm skeptical about this sudden maternal concern. That's not fair, honey. You don't understand how complicated the situation was. Your father and I, we were dealing with so much during the divorce, and you thought I'd be easier to manage if I wasn't your problem anymore. That's not true. We thought you'd be better off with professional support during such a difficult time. We wanted what was best for you. What was best for me was staying with my family. What was best for me was not being treated like an inconvenient obligation you could just outsource to the state. Rebecca, please don't talk like that. You're being so harsh. And there it was again, my perfectly reasonable emotional response being labeled as harsh or difficult or dramatic. Any reaction that made them uncomfortable was automatically invalid. I'm being honest, Mom. There's a difference. I understand you're angry and you have every right to be, but we're family, sweetheart. We can work through this. Can we? Because working through this would require you to acknowledge what you did wrong. It would require you to take responsibility for the choices you made and the impact they had on me. It would require you to understand why I might not trust you anymore. Of course, I understand that. I'm trying to make amends here. Are you? Because so far, all I've heard are excuses and justifications and attempts to minimize what happened. I haven't heard you take responsibility for anything. The conversation went in circles for another 20 minutes. Mom crying about how much she'd missed me, how guilty she'd felt, how complicated everything had been. But never once did she say, I made the wrong choice. I failed you as a mother. I'm sorry. Instead, she painted herself as another victim of circumstances, someone who'd done her best in an impossible situation. The narrative she'd constructed had no room for my experience, my pain, or my perspective. Finally, she played her trump card. Your father really isn't doing well, Rebecca. His heart condition is more serious than Michael let on. He might not have much time left. I'm sorry to hear that, Mom, but Dad's health doesn't erase 8 years of his choices. How can you be so cold? He's your father. He stopped being my father when he handed me over to social services and never looked back. Being a biological parent doesn't give you unlimited access to someone's life, especially not after you voluntarily removed yourself from it. Rebecca Elizabeth Anderson, I raised you better than this. The use of my full name and the assertion that she'd raised me was the final straw. Actually, Mom, you didn't raise me. Riverside Children's Home raised me. Dr. Martinez raised me. My college professors and chosen family raised me. You gave birth to me, and then you gave me away." She hung up crying. The last attempt came from Dad himself, 3 weeks later. I was studying for graduate school entrance exams when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Rebecca, it's Dad." His voice was weaker than I remembered, strained in a way that suggested Michael hadn't been lying about the health issues. For a moment, I was 12 again, desperate for his approval and attention. "Hello, Dad. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. About us, about the choices I made." He paused, and I could hear him struggling for breath. "I know I hurt you, sweetheart. I know I failed you." This was different. His voice carried a weight that the others hadn't, a recognition of genuine wrongdoing. I felt my carefully constructed walls wobble slightly. "Yes, you did." "I was scared, Rebecca. Your mother and I, we were falling apart, and everything felt like it was spinning out of control. Michael needed stability for his sports. Sarah was so sensitive to conflict, and you were trying to fix everything, trying to hold us all together. It felt like too much pressure to put on a 12-year-old. So you removed me from the equation. I thought it would be temporary. I thought once we got our lives sorted out, once the divorce was final and everyone had adjusted, we could bring you home. But you never did." Time kept passing, and it became harder to reach out. I was ashamed, Rebecca, ashamed of what I'd done, ashamed of how long I'd let it go on, and the longer it went, the more impossible it seemed to fix. I was quiet for a long moment, processing this closest thing to accountability I'd received from any of them. "Dad, do you understand what that did to me? Do you understand what it's like to be thrown away by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally?" "I do now," he said quietly, "and I'm sorrier than you can possibly imagine." "Are you? Or are you sorry because you're sick and scared and want to clear your conscience before you die?" The question hung in the air between us. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe both. Does that make it less real?" For the first time in 8 years, I found myself considering the possibility of forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Too much damage had been done for that, but perhaps release from the anger that had sustained me for so long. "Dad, I appreciate your apology. I really do. But I can't just pretend the last 8 years didn't happen. I can't go back to being the little girl who desperately wanted your love and approval. I know that. I know I've lost that forever, and I know it's my fault. Then what do you want from me? I want you to know that giving you up was the biggest mistake of my life. I want you to know that you were never the problem. We were, and I want you to know that I'm proud of the woman you've become, even though I had nothing to do with raising her." The tears came then, despite all my defenses. Not tears of reconciliation, but tears of grief for the father-daughter relationship we'd never had and never would have. "Thank you for saying that," I managed. "Will you consider coming to see me? Just once? I'm not asking for forgiveness or a relationship. I just want to apologize to your face." I closed my eyes, weighing the request. Part of me wanted to see him, to look him in the eye and tell him exactly what his choices had cost me. Part of me wanted to maintain the boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." After he hung up, I sat in my apartment for hours, staring out the window at the life I'd built without them. Marcus found me there when he came over for dinner, still in the same position I'd been in when Dad called. "You okay?" he asked, settling onto the couch beside me. I told him about the conversation, about the 3 attempts to re-enter my life, about the decision I was struggling to make. "What does your gut tell you?" he asked. "That I'm not the same person I was when they knew me. That I've built something beautiful out of the wreckage they left behind. And that while I might be able to forgive them eventually, I don't owe them access to the life I've created." "Sounds like you know what you want to do." I did. I'd spent 8 years becoming whole without them. I'd created a chosen family that supported and cherished me. I'd built a career dedicated to helping other abandoned children find their worth. I'd learned to love myself in ways they'd never been capable of. Their sudden interest in reconciliation wasn't about me, it was about them. Their guilt, their mortality, their need to rewrite history in a way that made them feel better about their choices. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need their love or approval or acknowledgement. I'd found all of those things in other places with people who'd earned the right to be in my life. The next morning, I wrote 3 emails to Sarah, Michael, and my parents. The messages were simple and nearly identical. I appreciate you reaching out, but I'm not interested in rebuilding a relationship at this time. I've created a full, happy life with people who chose to be in it from the beginning. I wish you well, but I won't be participating in any family events or maintaining regular contact. Please respect this boundary. I hit send on all 3 before I could change my mind. Marcus found me crying on the kitchen floor an hour later. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief. I'd finally stopped waiting for them to love me the way I deserved to be loved. I'd finally stopped hoping they would transform into the family I'd always needed them to be. It's over, I told him. It's finally over. That evening, Dr. Martinez called me back after I'd left her a voicemail about my decision. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I said without hesitation. "For the first time in my life, I feel completely free." "Good. You've worked hard to get here, Rebecca. You should be proud of yourself." "I am, and you know what? I don't need them anymore. I don't need their apologies or their guilt or their last-minute attempts at redemption. I've built something better without them." "What's that?" "A life where I'm valued, not tolerated, where I'm chosen, not abandoned, where my worth isn't conditional on being convenient or easy to love." 3 months later, I graduated with my master's degree in social work. My chosen family filled 2 entire rows at the ceremony. Friends from Riverside, college roommates, professors who'd become mentors, and Marcus, who proposed to me that night with a ring he'd been carrying around for weeks. As I walked across that stage to accept my diploma, I thought about the 12-year-old girl who'd believed she was unlovable because her own parents couldn't see her worth. I wished I could tell her that she wasn't broken or defective or too difficult to love, that someday she'd build a life so full of authentic connection and purpose that their rejection would become just one chapter in a much larger story of resilience and triumph. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't getting back at them for what they'd done. The best revenge was becoming so complete and content without them that their absence became irrelevant. I never saw my father before he died 6 months later. Michael called to tell me about the funeral, but I didn't attend. Instead, I spent that day volunteering at a children's shelter, reading stories to kids who'd been abandoned by their own families. That's where I belonged, not mourning a relationship that had never really existed, but building new ones with people who understood that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about choice, commitment, and unconditional love. I'd finally learned the difference, and it had set me free.